When it started out, the first few months of the CPA, people say it was different, that people were mingling more. Did you sense that?
I did. And that was a real sort of window of opportunity, because those were the months where you could get around, and you had more professional diplomats there with the occupation authority, people who had worked as ambassadors around the world, who were career State Department people. And what happened was, over time, a lot of those people were rotated out, and various political appointees were sent. People who had less foreign experience, were less worldly. You know, one of my most telling statistics in the book is, according to one estimate, and I kid you not here, more than half the people who came to work for the Coalition Provisional Authority had to apply for their very first passport to go to Baghdad. So we're not talking citizens of the world being sent there. We're talking people who were neophytes. And when those people started coming, even though there was an ability to go out and about, they really chose not to. They didn't seek to push the limits to go out and have dinner in restaurants in Baghdad, to travel out and about. Yes, there were some brave people. I don't mean to suggest that everybody was like this, but you know, I was surprised by the number of people I would run into in the palace. This is the Republican Palace, the headquarters of the CPA in the Green Zone. People who would say to me that they hadn't been out in months, and that they were eating all their meals there. All their entertainment was in the palace. And I was thinking to myself, boy, there's a whole amazing city out here, one of the world's most ancient cities. Of course, you know, it's a little strife-torn. There are problems. Electricity isn't always on. Many of the shops are closed, but that's still there. But that too would have been important to see and understand and grasp. Precisely, because you're sitting in there in that bubble. You have 24/7 electricity. You have air conditioning on all the time. You're not wanting for food. There's no traffic jams. Life is good. And you get disconnected from what the realities are on the ground when you're not talking to people, when you're not experiencing that. And I think there's a middle ground here. I'm not suggesting that they should have torn down the walls and not had any headquarters zone, but they could have done this in a more culturally sensitive way. There were plenty of veteran diplomats who came there and said, look, we need more local food. We need a respect for local traditions. They were brushed off.
Is part of what happens here that the Defense Department takes over this, and the interagency rivalries in Washington get so strong that they decide they don't want any diplomats. They don't want all these other people. This is going to be a DoD project, and you know, since Powell was against the war, the State Department will be shut out?
That was certainly an element of it. And another important related aspect of it was that the neoconservatives in the Bush administration, in the Pentagon, in the White House, viewed many of the State Department's veteran Arabists as insufficiently committed to the notion of democratizing the Middle East. They were seen as old school thinkers, people who had cozied up to the previous regimes in that part of the world. And Iraq was going to be different. We were going to be changing that country. It was going to be transformative. And as such, you needed a whole new crop of people, and you needed people without old biases. And so they thought, let's bring in some young people. Let's bring in people who don't have any baggage. The problem is that when you're dealing with post-conflict reconstruction and in the Middle East, you want people who speak the language, who know the culture, who know the place, who understand and have some history with civil military operations. They didn't get that.
You write about, I mean, in a sense, it seems to me what you say in the book is that ideological fealty was prized more than technical competence or expertise.
In many cases, that's true.
But then how do you explain the extraordinary corruption that you describe, and why is that happening? I mean, that was the part that stunned me, because I can understand this ideological project which says we don't want all these State Department guys, we don't want all these CIA guys, they're old school. But what explains the lack of controls that allow billions of dollars, it seems, to be looted?
I mean, just shocking. I tell you why I think this is the case. It's because part of the thinking was we need to go in there with a light footprint. You know, not too many soldiers. You know, people have talked extensively about Don Rumsfeld's view on this. And part of it was, in the world of Reconstruction, let's outsource as much as possible. Let's get contractors doing a lot of things that you might have otherwise had the U.S. military doing, or people working for U.S. agencies like the U.S. Agency for International Development. So as a result, a lot of things were just pushed out to private contractors, and this was done without a whole lot of planning. It was Much of this was done on the fly, so the requisite controls and safeguards you might expect weren't there. And literally, hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars was being dispersed without proper procedures for accounting for it. I mean, I write about in the book a case of a contractor who bid for the job of guarding Baghdad's airport, even though the airport wasn't open, even though this contractor had no previous experience guarding an airport or any facility, had never won a federal contract before, got this $16 million contract from the CPA. And when the contractor said, well, we don't have the money for startup expenses, what the CPA official in charge of this said was, come to the palace and bring a duffel bag. And they came with a duffel bag and they found this man at his desk with $2 million in brand new shrink-wrapped $100 bills sitting on the desk. And the contractor was told, put that money in your duffel bag and take it, that's your startup fee.
When you look at the picture, one of the things I wonder about is how were the kind of fateful decisions that we now look upon, at many of us, as mistakes taken? So you have the disbanding of the army and this radical de-Baathification of the government, which mean that Iraq is left with no armed forces and essentially no bureaucracy, no administration. The spine of the government, in a sense, collapses. Is that related to this bubble where they really aren't seeing that what you're doing is actually creating a situation where there are no sanitation engineers in the country anymore?
Well, those decisions were made before Ambassador Bremer arrived or very shortly thereafter. So it's not really a product of the bubble, but what it is a product of is the thinking of a small group of people within the present administration. It wasn't the result of a consultative process. It wasn't a result of lengthy discussions with experts at the State Department, at the CIA, at the National Security Council. It really was the work of a handful of people in the Pentagon, influenced by groups of Iraqi exiles, including Ahmed Chalabi with de-Baathification, for instance. They came up with these policies and they were promulgated by Ambassador Bremer without the typical interagency discussion and approval process. It was largely circumvented. Colin Powell, who was then Secretary of State, heard about the dissolution of the army when it was announced by Bremer. He was never given a heads up.
Do you think that this kind of mindset has changed much? I know you've left, but what I saw in Iraq was something very similar to what you described, partly because security has gotten so bad that it's even worse in a sense. I mean, I don't think people in the green zone ever venture out anymore.
The green zone's walls are higher, they're thicker, there are more guards, and it's not just the outer walls. Now there are mini green zones in there. The palace has its own rung of walls and barbed wire and guards and security. And so even, the ability of Americans, as I write about, to go jogging in the green zone like they did in the first years, you don't do that anymore. And what this has meant is not just that America's diplomats in Baghdad are cloistered in this zone, but so are Iraq's new leaders, because Prime Minister al-Maliki and his government, most of those ministers live in the green zone, they work in the green zone. They're just as cut off from the people they're supposed to be governing as the Americans were during the occupation.